My best friend sat at my kitchen table every Sunday for 10 years, drinking my coffee, holding my kids, and sleeping with my husband. I'm Claire Whitmore. I'm 52. I have 2 grown children. I've lived on Oak Meadow Court since before the mailboxes leaned, long enough to see neighbors come and go, and lawns turn to patchwork, depending on who's carrying grief that year. When I met Nora, I thought, finally, here's my person. We were 30, new to the street, still young enough to believe in before and after moments. She showed up on my porch with a foil pan of baked ziti and a loud laugh that poured out like a promise. I'm next door, she said, tipping her chin to the left. If you need a cup of sugar or a babysitter or someone to tell you if that haircut you're thinking about is a bad idea, I'm your girl. She had one of those faces you trust without permission. Brown eyes, restless, mouth always plugged into an opinion. She talked with her hands, her bracelets chiming like she brought her own soundtrack. Our friendship formed around ordinary tasks. We traded babysitting when the kids were small, swapped recipes with notes in the margins, pulled the cul-de-sac together for block parties and snow shoveling, and the kind of gossip that lives in the safe zone. Who's repainting, who's pregnant, who's switching jobs. The kids shared scooters and scraped knees. When my mother got sick, Nora sat on my kitchen floor and organized a meal train like it was a military operation. She called me sis long before we earned it. Some words arrive early and grow into their meaning later. I married Mark at 24 because he was the kind of man who made a list before a road trip and checked the air in the tires twice. He smelled like cedar and laundry soap and the faint metal of tools. He loved systems, the right way to fold towels, the right route to the beach that avoided one terrible intersection. He had a laugh that started in his chest and took a second to show up on his face. We were good for a long time. Not perfect, no one is, but good in the way you can lean your life against without worrying about splinters. He worked in project management for a construction company. He came home with sawdust stories. I kept the numbers at a local credit union, the friendly kind, where you know people's birthdays because they tell you without asking. On Sundays, I made a pot of coffee like ritual. We had a table that stretched out under a runner I'd sewn years ago. The fabric faded in the exact spots where we placed the salt shaker and the jar of honey. Held in the middle of those Sundays were little confessions, the kids' crushes, the money worries that nibble at the edges, the small wins that give you a reason to bake something. Nora came through the back door without knocking. She started doing that almost immediately, and because I'm the kind who says come in and means it, I never told her to stop. There is a difference between being open and being unguarded. I didn't know it then. The first hairline crack showed up like weather. It was one of those winter mornings when the air tastes like a coin. The coffee maker sputtered to life. Nora came in, wrapped in a red scarf big enough to count as a second person. She kissed my cheek, asked about my son's economics project, dug into the bowl of clementines like she lived here. She did the thing she always did. She fixed her hair in the window like a mirror while talking to me about Daniel, the man she'd been seeing on and off. They were in a soft break season, which in Nora language meant she was restless, but not done. Mark walked in, still damp from the shower, wearing the sweatshirt he'd had since college. He said, "Morning," and I watched his face float past me to land on her first. It was less than a second, a glance with weight. I felt the shift like a draft you can't source. If I had said something right then, if I had made a joke, if I had wrapped my arms around his waist and pulled him toward me, if I had held his gaze long enough to remind us both of our private language, would any of this have gone differently? These are the questions that show up after the door locks behind the past. They found reasons to talk that winter. Nora had taxes she didn't understand. Mark understood everything that came in a spreadsheet. He offered to help, and I offered coffee, while they hunched over the island with pencil smudges on their fingers and the serious faces of people doing something responsible. It didn't occur to me that intimacy looks like paperwork if you're not paying attention. He'd stop by her place after work to look at a leaking faucet. She'd swing over to ask what withholding really meant. I was there, mostly, only sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes I was shopping for groceries, or driving to my mother's old house to sort boxes, or walking off a headache around the block, because I don't like leaving pain unconfronted. I used to joke that I was married to a man in a cul-de-sac. It felt sweet to be needed. I was the one neighbors texted at 10 p.m. about a missing cat or a recipe emergency. My phone was full of lists. There is a kind of pride in being the hinge that lets everything swing and never squeaks. Then one day you realize you've become the part no one sees unless it's not working. The second crack was the tie clip. I was returning a book to Nora, kitchen memoir, beautiful, made me cry in the quiet way, and I walked into her place through the back like always. On the dining table, beside a bowl of keys and mail, sat Mark's tie clip. Silver, narrow, etched with a line like a road heading somewhere. I knew that clip. I bought it for him on our 20th anniversary, wrapped it in tissue paper, and hid it in the sugar canister because he never looked there. I picked it up and felt its small, cold truth in my palm. "Mark stopped by," she said from the living room, too cheerful. "Wanted to drop that before he forgot it. You know he loses everything that's small." She smiled as if we were co-parents to his habits. People make a mess of language when they're afraid. I set the clip back down very gently, like it was a house of cards. All the ordinary objects in my life started looking like exhibits. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed and looked at our wedding picture on the dresser. Young faces, Nora standing next to me in lilac, holding my veil before the wind could take it. When I looked at it before, my chest lifted. That night, I felt tired in my bones. My first instinct was to talk to him right away. I could hear myself, calm. "I found your tie clip at Nora's. Help me understand." But what if he lied so smooth it unstitched my doubt? What if he told me I was being dramatic, paranoid, unkind? I didn't want to hear myself apologize for asking a question I'd earned. I turned off the light and lay awake in a room thick with a silence I have no other word for, but dishonest. My body knew before my brain caught up. Nerves started catching on things. I noticed the sound of his phone buzzing on the bathroom counter. He picked it up like it contained a fragile idea. Careful, one thumb held across the screen as if blocking a glare. He took the dog for longer walks after dinner. He laughed at nothing, alone, in the office with the door half closed. When I asked what was funny, he said, "You had to be there," which is a sentence that builds a wall. He came home with a new cologne he said someone at work gave him for a project completed. He started wearing the good pullover on weekdays. There is an agreement most marriages make without saying it. Our small privacy stops at the edge of our home. When that invisible border shifted, I felt it like the way a picture on the wall goes crooked and, no matter how much else is happening, you can't stop seeing it. One Sunday, Nora cried at our table over something small, and I held her hand because that is what we do. She said Daniel was back in the picture and then out again, and she was tired of being brave. Mark poured her more coffee the way he knows I like it. Splash of cream first, then the pour, then the stir. He did it for her without asking, and she didn't thank him, which somehow cut deeper than if she had. Gratitude is a public performance. Familiarity is private. I watched his hand, steady, right until the spoon clicked the cup. My skin prickled like I'd been standing too close to a bonfire that was burning nothing you could see. I started keeping a small notebook, the kind I used at the bank. I didn't write suspicions. I wrote facts that could hold their own weight. Thursday, Mark at Nora's from 6:40 to 7:55 to fix porch light. Saturday, text from Nora. Tell Mark to call me when he's free. Monday, Mark's blue hoodie on Nora's chair. She said he left it after helping with the tax forms. I didn't show it to anyone. I wrote for myself to stand somewhere solid. A woman who is certain is hard to move. A woman who can be made to doubt herself is a paper door. We had a neighborhood barbecue in May. The grills lined up like a little army, kids half home from college, dogs tripping leashes. I watched him watching her, not staring, he is not clumsy, but calibrating his position in the world to her movements like a person tuning a radio to catch the station with the least static. She laughed at something our neighbor said, and Mark's shoulders let down in a way they hadn't in months. There are tiny signs you can't describe to anyone without sounding like you've lost your grip. The body keeps its own ledger, and if you read it, you will find what you knew all along. People will ask me later why I didn't confront them right then. Why I didn't blow up a life I didn't recognize anymore. I could pretend it was strategy. The truth is more complicated and more human. I still loved my husband. Also, I was ashamed, not because of what they were doing. Shame will fly to the wrong person like a moth to a flame, but because I had missed it in my own house for so long. Pride ties knots in your tongue. I decided I would see what I see until I couldn't pretend to be blind. June arrived. The air got fat and loud with insects. My daughter came home for a week, and the house felt like itself again. Bowls of cereal left in rude places, laundry that smelled like the outside. She and I sat on the front steps one night, bare feet on warm concrete. She told me about a professor she admired, about the way she liked to sit in the far left row, so her brain listened differently. I almost told her then. I almost said, "I think your father is having an affair with Nora." But I looked at her face, still soft in sleep when she stayed up too late, and I swallowed it because I wanted to give her 7 more days of not knowing. The wedding picture on the dresser found company. I kept noticing photos where Nora stood next to us. Pumpkin patch, beach day, graduations, a backyard after a storm when all our kids dragged branches to the curb and we fed them pizza at 11 p.m. Whatever this was, it had roots in a story I had loved. In the morning, I opened my closet and saw the dresses I'd worn to all those scenes and felt like a stand-in for my own life. Then came the earring. It was late afternoon, golden light hitting the kitchen in a way that makes you believe in mercy. I was changing the sheets, the blue ones, because it was hot and those feel like water on skin. My hand slid under Mark's pillow and caught on something hard. I pulled out a small hoop, gold with a tiny pearl that looked like the moon when it's shy. I knew that earring. I had watched it flash at Nora's jaw 100 times when she threw her head back to laugh. I held it, my heart beat in my palm. I liked that earring on her. I hate that I thought that while I stood in my own bedroom holding proof. I set it on the nightstand and looked at it until my dinner burned. Mark came home to the smell of scorched rice and opened windows and found me at the sink, scrubbing a pot as if you could get life back with enough effort. He kissed the back of my neck on his way to the fridge. "Rough day?" he said, pleasant as a weatherman. I dried my hands. I picked up the earring. I turned and held it out to him like an offering, palm up, quiet. "That yours?" I asked, like we were talking about a lost sock. His eyes flicked from my hand to my face in a movement I had never seen in 28 years. I watched him pick the truth he could live with in the space between 2 breaths. "Huh," he said, so casually I almost admired it. He took the earring, studied it. "Isn't that one of yours?" "No," I said. "It's Nora's." His mouth did a curious thing, half grimace, half almost smile, and then settled into neutral. "She must have dropped it," he said, and placed it back in my palm as if it were nothing, as if I had found a penny I didn't need. "She was here with you last week, remember? For that, what was it, the garden catalog?" He opened the fridge and bent to peer inside, safe in the mundane cold. "We still have the lemon chicken leftovers?" I stood in our kitchen and learned how a person chooses survival over respect. I put the earring in the small dish on my dresser where I keep hairpins and the spare buttons that come with blouses. I didn't cry. Something in me that had been pleading for confirmation sat down and folded its hands. We ate dinner in a thin version of our old life, Two people describing their day to each other in colorless lines. He kissed me goodnight. I lay still until he slept, and then I got up and stood in the dark and tried to feel the shape of what I would do next. In the morning, I called the bank and asked for a few days off. I told my manager I needed to handle something at home, and she said, "Take the time you need," in the voice women use with each other when they understand more than is being said. I made a list. I am good at lists. It felt like air. I started with the easy things, phone records, not the content, just the frequency. How many times a day? How long? What hours? The numbers lined up like a barcode. Nora's contact, under her full name, because I never put hearts next to people, appeared at odd hours. Midnight, 5 a.m., lunch breaks taken in cars. I told myself best friends talk early and late. I told myself logic doesn't erase pattern. I checked the calendar on the wall with the little boxes. You don't realize how a calendar can become a diary until you use it like one. Mark's late meeting nights matched Nora's book club dots. Our book club meets on Thursdays and has since God invented time. These dots were on Tuesdays. I looked at the blue pen, at the straightness of his handwriting. That's the thing. He never lied sloppily. He is careful. People who are careful leave less evidence. They also leave enough. I called Daniel, which is to say I texted him a simple question. "Are you and Nora together?" He called immediately, like a man whose pride had been itching. "No," he said, too fast. "What's this about?" I could hear a radio in the background, a soccer match he liked to follow. I paced the hallway looking at the pictures of my children at the zoo, their small bodies leaning into our legs. "Nothing," I said, and meant everything. Then I did something small and terrible and ordinary. I read Nora's public social media like a stranger. I had never been interested before. I was a person's person, not a timeline one. In photos from random Tuesdays, she posted close-ups of food, pasta at a place across town, a cocktail with the kind of ice that looks shipped in from a more expensive city. In the background of one, reflected in a window, a navy sleeve and a wrist with a watch I knew. None of that would stand up in court. Some things only need to stand up inside you. If I had been a different kind of woman, I might have driven to a motel and made a scene. I might have called her husband when she had one. I might have told our children in a righteous fury and made them pick sides. The revenge stories we tell at wine tables make that sort of fire look noble. But I have learned that fire burns the house you're still standing in. I needed a different heat, something that would warm only me. So I started making space, not dramatic, not cruel, just space. I didn't invite Nora over. I didn't answer immediately when she did the backdoor knock with her elbow, hands full of something sweet from the bakery. I told her I was running late, that my head hurt, that I had calls. When she texted me, "Tell Mark to call me," I responded with, "You can reach him at work." I put a period at the end because a period is a fence. She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, like a person refusing to climb. I watched the distance grow in inches I could feel in my chest. Mark noticed, and he didn't. He seemed relieved when I volunteered to help my sister repaint her living room over 2 weekends. He said, "Get out of the house, you need it," and kissed my forehead like a father sends a child to camp. He looked handsome in the summer light. I am not made of stone. I packed my bag and drove 3 hours and slept in a small guest room that smelled like lavender detergent and cried once into a towel because I hadn't cried at home where the walls are judgmental. When I came back, everything was where I left it. The mug with the chip on the rim, the squeeze bottle honey, the dish with the earring, which I had left there on purpose like a landmine only I could hear ticking. He hadn't moved it. That told me as much as anything. A person who won't address a thing will move around it carefully until the house closes in. I started walking in the evenings. I took the long loop around the neighborhood where the sidewalks buckle under the roots of oak trees. I waved to people. I listened to podcasts about people who rebuild after disasters because I needed proof that it wasn't sentimental to believe in a future. On those walks, I sorted, not just what they had done, but who I would be next. Fury will keep you alive for a week. Discipline will keep you alive for a life. I wanted the kind of anger that sharpened me, not the kind that ate me. Nora caught me once halfway down the block. She pulled up beside me in her SUV and rolled down the window. "You've been scarce," she said, pretty and breezy, like we were sisters who had argued over shoes. I looked at her and saw every version I had loved. The woman who kept spare Band-Aids in her bag for children who weren't hers. The woman who sat with me in urgent care when I thought my chest pain was a heart attack and it turned out to be anxiety wearing a costume. The woman who once held my daughter's hair back when she got sick on a field trip. I hated her for making me feel protective of her even now. "Busy," I said. "Is Mark home?" she asked. She was looking ahead at the road like she was asking about the weather to be polite. "Not sure," I said, knowing exactly that he was, and that she knew I knew. There is a moment where friendship dies, not with a bang, but with a series of questions asked like errands. She nodded, swallowed, forced a smile. "Tell him I'll text him about the—" She stopped. "About the thing." I stared at her until she drove away. Sometimes I think betrayal is just language going bad. Words rot from the inside. I wish I could tell you the exact second I decided on quiet revenge. There wasn't a singular spark. It was accumulation. It was the way my hands trembled when I poured coffee in the morning, no matter how much I wanted to claim calm. It was the way my son's text, "Made chilly, didn't burn it this time," made tears come out of nowhere, because love is a light you notice when the power goes out somewhere else. It was the way I kept moving my wedding ring around and forgetting which finger it belonged on, the circle leaving a pale dent on my skin that felt like a private scar. Here's what I resolved. I would not yell. I would not perform suffering for them. I would not make my children carriers of our poor choices. I would gather what I needed, like a woman preparing a house for winter. I would make plans with a mind easier to live in than a heart on fire. I would let truth do as much of the heavy lifting as possible and only add my weight where necessary. When you decide that, your eyes change. Your days do too. I stopped offering Mark the softer half of the avocado. I cut both halves into a bowl and ate them myself. I moved the good bath towels to the linen closet in the guest room and claimed them as mine. Small treasons told only to me. I told the book club I'd take August off, and everyone nodded with concern and respect, because women our age understand when someone needs a season under the covers. I didn't hide. I just withdrew the parts of me that were being spent like someone else's money. By then, the signs took off their disguises. They grew bold in the way wrong things become confident when they believe they won't be confronted. Mark left the house at 9 p.m. to pick up a tool from a coworker who lived 10 minutes away and didn't return until 11:30 with an apology that sounded borrowed. Nora posted a photo of a city view from a restaurant, and 2 nights later, Mark told me he'd tried that exact new place with a client. I asked how he liked the pasta, and he described the one I'd seen in her photo. "You should have brought me," I said without heat, and he said, "Next time." And we both heard the lie sit down at the table like an extra guest. I didn't need more proof, but it arrived anyway. Late July, humid enough that even the birds sounded tired. I walked past Nora's on my evening loop and saw, through the thin slice of window shade that always fails to meet the sill, the outline of a man at her kitchen island. He had Mark's shape. It is a shape I could pick out of a crowd. The slope of his shoulders, the way he stands when he's comfortable, hand resting on the counter, weight on his left heel. Maybe someone else would have walked in, thrown the door open, demanded. I kept walking. It is a kind of power to be the one who knows and chooses silence, because the silence is not fear. It is strategy. When I got home, I took the dish with the earring off my dresser and put it in my purse. The next morning, I baked a loaf of banana bread and wrapped it in a tea towel. I walked next door and knocked on Nora's front door like a stranger. She opened it with surprise, So stagey it would have been funny any other season of my life. "Hey, you," she said, making it light. "Where have you been hiding?" "Thought you might like bread," I said. I walked in and set it on her counter. I took the earring out of my purse and placed it beside the knife block so it caught the sun. She looked down at it, and the blood left her face so fast I worried she'd faint. She reached for it and then stopped, the way your hand stops over a burner that's still hot from an hour ago. "You dropped this at my house," I said, almost kind. She opened her mouth and closed it. "Claire," she started, and I watched her decide which script to use. There is the denial script. There is the confess but minimize script. There is the I'm the victim here script. It is astonishing, when you are calm, to see a person flip through their choices. She picked denial. "That's not mine," she said slowly, evenly, and then winced because we both knew she'd worn those earrings to brunch a dozen times. "I mean, maybe it's similar." "Keep it," I said. "Looks like you need it more. I left the bread there. I didn't say anything cruel. I didn't say anything at all. I walked back to my house, moved the wedding photo from the dresser to a box under the bed, and breathed like I had just set down a heavy suitcase carried too far. Quiet revenge begins, I think, with knowing what you won't do. I would not medicate my pain with spectacle. I would not make my children choose. I would not give them the satisfaction of my wildness. Instead, I would be careful. I would be exact. I would see this through like a woman taking apart a sweater knit too tight, slowly, stitch by stitch, until I had yarn enough to make something warm for myself. The last Sunday before everything tipped, she came over like always. She knocked once, then pushed the door open with her hip. Balancing a carton of blueberries and a stack of gossip magazines we both pretended we didn't like. Mark was in the yard, trimming the hedge, pretending this wasn't happening. Nora set the berries on the table and looked around my kitchen like she had to relearn it. I poured coffee into 2 cups and set one across from me, and didn't offer her cream because she likes to decide for herself. Her hand hovered over the sugar. "We didn't sit," she said. "How's your week?" like an actress in the wrong play. "Quiet," I said. "Mark around?" she asked, glancing toward the yard. "In the back," I said. I watched her not go. Something in her face crumpled and then smoothed out like a bed being remade. She swallowed hard. "Claire," she started again. "You know you're my—" "Don't," I said softly, and she stopped, not because I was harsh, because she heard herself in my voice and recognized a boundary she hadn't seen before. She nodded, folded. "Okay," she said. "Okay." After she left, I took my ring off and set it in the small wooden bowl by the sink where we put keys and acorns found on walks. I watched it sit there, obscene and simple. I looked around my kitchen, at the coffee maker, at the runner on the table faded where the sun loves it too much, at the chair where my daughter sat when she shaved the side of her head and needed me to say, it looked bold, even though I was afraid it meant something about a boy I didn't know how to ask about. I touched the back of that chair like it could reassure me, and it almost did. I made a plan, then. Nothing dramatic. A series of small turns. I would gather the documents I needed. I would speak to someone who knows the law's shape and how to move within it. I would open an account in my own name at a different bank, because no matter how much trust we use as furniture, money is a wall or a door, depending on who owns the hinges. I would tell my children the truth, but only what was mine to tell. I would not sabotage what wasn't mine to keep. I would not beg. I would not rage. I would leave a space where their choices could echo back to them without my voice getting in the way. I am telling this now to say, the beginning of the end was not an explosion. It was a woman who knew the names of her neighbor's dogs standing in her kitchen and choosing herself. It was remembering that I had a life before this life and would have one after. It was putting on sneakers and walking the long way around the neighborhood at dusk when the air is kinder and the houses glow like lanterns, and realizing I didn't want to be the person who explained to everyone why the house was on fire. I wanted to be the person who saved what mattered and stepped out clean. That night, Mark came to bed late. He smelled like he'd been out in the heat too long. He turned away from me the way he had been, careful to keep a slice of the bed between us like a treaty. I watched the dark shape of him and thought about all the ways we had been good. Love isn't a shield. It's a story, and stories end. I closed my eyes and practiced waking up in a house with fewer lies. In the morning, I cut the banana bread I'd kept for us into thick slices and wrapped them in wax paper like lunches for a field trip. I packed one for me to eat in the car after the meeting with a lawyer whose name I got from a woman in my book club who went through something quieter than mine and survived. I left one on the counter with a note that said, "Back around noon." I was polite to the end. On my way out, I paused at the small dish on the dresser. Empty now. The earring was gone. I smiled, not a happy smile, not a cruel one. Just a smile that meant, I see the board, I see the pieces, I've decided on my move. And that is how it began, not with fury, not with glass breaking or voices raised, but with a steady woman in an American suburb, on a street where the mailboxes lean, choosing to let the truth stand and do its work, and learning that quiet can be the sharpest tool you own. I left the house with the kind of calm that makes people think you've already cried all you can. The sun was just beginning to reach over the roofs, glazing the mailboxes with light. I drove with the windows half open so the wind could do what it does best, carry things away a little at a time. The lawyer's office sat above a dentist and a dry cleaner, the kind of building where new lives quietly begin after old ones collapse. Her name was Janine Patel, small, sharp eyes, a handshake like truth. She didn't offer sympathy, she offered clarity. That was better. I told her I wasn't sure what I wanted yet. She said, "Then start with information. People make better choices when they can see the map." We went through the basics, assets, the house, the pension, the children, both adults, thank God. I signed nothing that morning. I just learned where the doors were. When I left, she said, "You don't owe anyone a scene, Mrs. Whitmore." The way she said it, I believed her. Back home, the neighborhood shimmered under that lazy summer haze that makes even betrayal look picturesque. Nora's car was gone. Mark's truck sat in the driveway, speckled with dust. I stepped inside and was hit by the familiar smell. Coffee, dog, the faint trace of his cologne living in the curtains. He was in the kitchen, working on a grocery list, pen tapping the counter. "Hey," he said, casual. "Morning," I replied. I wanted to look at him until he blinked, but I didn't. Control, I reminded myself, is a form of revenge too. We made small talk about dinner, the lawn, the heat wave coming. Every word skimmed the surface of a lake we both knew was deep and dark. He asked what I'd done that morning. "Errands," I said. He nodded, relieved I hadn't asked him about his own. Later, when he left for a quick meeting, I walked through each room as if auditing my own life. What was mine? What was ours? What had been touched by their secret hands? I gathered the photo albums first, not out of sentiment, but evidence. Photos don't lie, but they can be cross-examined. In every frame from the last 2 years, their eyes had found each other before the camera. The body knows what it wants to be near. I stacked the albums, labeled them, slid them into a storage box with a note to myself. Remember who you were before forgiveness became an instinct. That evening, I called my daughter, Maya. She was back at grad school, drowning in deadlines. Her voice always carried the same brightness that used to fill the house. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" "Fine," I said. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. I was fine the way stone is fine after it's been weathered, still standing, changed forever. We talked about her roommate, her thesis, her upcoming trip. Before hanging up, she said, "You sound different, calmer." I smiled at the honesty kids keep, even after they're grown. "I'm learning how to breathe again," I told her. She laughed softly. That's good. You deserve easy air, Mom. When the call ended, I sat for a long time staring at the blank television screen, my reflection layered over its black glass. I thought of Nora, maybe texting him right now, writing the same kind of small, hungry messages I once wrote in my 20s. I didn't hate her. Hate requires closeness. She'd already moved somewhere I wouldn't follow. A week passed like a secret rehearsal. Mark came home later, wore nicer shirts, avoided eye contact during breakfast. I became polite to the point of sainthood. Politeness is armor. It keeps people guessing. One night, he left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, trust dulled by habit. I wasn't looking for proof. I just wanted confirmation that I wasn't mad. But there it was anyway, an email chain labeled house plans. Harmless, if not for the timestamp, 2 a.m., and the message at the bottom, you looked beautiful tonight. I wish we didn't have to keep pretending. And attached was a photo of Nora's dining room, his coffee mug beside her wine glass. I didn't feel the jolt I expected, just a slow, precise kind of relief. Truth is heavy, but it steadies you once you stop running from it. I closed the laptop gently, as if it were sleeping. Then I opened a new folder on my phone, Next Life. Inside, I began saving copies, emails, dates, bank statements, pictures, not out of vengeance, out of clarity, because I'd spent too many years confused, and confusion is a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Days blurred into a rhythm of small rehearsals for independence. I met with Janine again. We adjusted numbers, made lists. I opened the new account, moved half my paycheck, started keeping my car keys in my purse instead of the bowl by the door. Small things, but every woman who's ever had to start over knows. Freedom is built from logistics. I also started saying no. No to neighbors who assumed I'd host the block barbecue. No to my boss asking if I could take on one more client. No to Nora's texts that arrived like ghosts. Miss you. Can we talk? Each no was a match struck in the dark. Then, one humid Friday evening, fate gave me the only scene I ever wanted. There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Nora standing there, hair damp, eyes red. Behind her, Mark's car idled at the curb. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice cracked. For a moment, I almost let her in. Habit is strong, but I'd done enough hospitality for one lifetime. "We already have," I said softly. She blinked, confused. "I don't think we—" I held up my phone. On the screen glowed the email chain. Her words, his words, the digital fossils of their intimacy. Her mouth opened, then closed. Tears came fast, messy. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. That line, so old it should have been retired. They never mean to, they just do. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me so Mark couldn't claim the threshold. He'd started up the walkway, seeing her cry, seeing me calm. "Claire, wait," he said, hands half raised like a man approaching a wild animal. I looked at both of them under the porch light that had always buzzed faintly, the one he never quite fixed. The night smelled like cut grass and something burning far away. "You two should go," I said. Not loud, not bitter, just final. He opened his mouth. I raised a hand. "Whatever you think you need to explain, keep it. I already know the story." Then I did something unexpected, even to myself. I smiled. A small, clean smile that reached nowhere near forgiveness, but close enough to peace. "Take care of each other," I said, and then I shut the door. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was mine. It hummed like something being rebuilt. In the kitchen, the coffee maker clicked off. The house exhaled. I sat at the table, the same table where everything began, and wrote a single line on a notepad. "Tomorrow, call the realtor." Then beneath it, "and buy a new table, because some places hold ghosts you don't need to entertain anymore." I called the realtor the next morning. Her name was Elaine. She'd lived in our town forever, the sort of woman who knew which houses flooded in heavy rain and which ones collected teenagers on Friday nights. I told her I wanted to list quickly. I told her I wanted the sign to appear without fanfare. She said, "Of course," and "I'll be discreet," and "You'll be surprised by how fast life moves once you let it." I didn't tell Mark before the sign went up. I could have. Maybe I should have. But the truth is, he'd had a long head start on moving me out of my own life. I stood at the window with my coffee and watched Elaine push the stake into our front lawn. The letters looked too clean for the kind of story they were telling. For sale. A small dog barked 2 yards over as if announcing it to the block. I took a breath and waited for the sound in my chest to settle. He noticed when he pulled into the driveway that evening, braking so hard his seatbelt caught him. I was in the kitchen slicing tomatoes. He walked in with the kind of careful energy people use when approaching a cliff. "What is that?" "It's a sign," I said, and kept slicing. "You're selling the house?" "We are," I said, and let the pronoun hang between us like a chance to step into the same boat. He leaned on the counter, hands flat. "Claire, I spoke to a lawyer," I said, not cruelly. "We'll keep this clean. I don't want a war. I've lived in enough of one, even if it was quiet." He stared at me, and for a second I saw the man I married, the one who color-coded packing boxes in our first apartment, the one who lifted the crib with me at midnight because I decided the baby would sleep better on the other wall. He put a hand to his mouth like he could push the words back in. "I didn't mean for any of this to—" "I know," I said. "You didn't mean to. You just did." He let his hands fall. We stood there, 2 people in a kitchen we had chosen together, surrounded by proof that ordinary can hold everything from birthday candles to betrayal. He nodded slowly, as if taking attendance inside himself. "Okay," he said, "if this is what you want." It wasn't what I wanted. It was what was left. I called Maya and then our son Ben that night. I didn't give them a villain to throw tomatoes at. I gave them the truth the way I wish someone had given it to me, simple, steady, with enough dignity to stand on its own. They both went quiet in that way grown children do when they're trying to be brave for you. "Are you okay?" Maya asked. "I will be," I said. "It's going to be different, but different isn't always bad." Ben cleared his throat. "Do you want me to come home?" "No," I said. "Finish your week. Call me tomorrow. We'll make a list." My kids inherited my love of lists. It's a comfort and a curse. The next few days slipped into a rhythm of preparations and small griefs. Elaine staged the living room with throw pillows that didn't know our kids' names. I packed the high school trophies I never dusted but could never throw away. I found notes in junk drawers from little hands. "Mom, wake me up at 6 for field trip." "Dad, I owe you $5. Nora is coming over, bring cookies." I sat cross-legged on the floor and let the ache move through me like weather. It came, it went, I kept packing. Neighbors started appearing in the way they do when something shifts on the street, compliments about the lawn, questions about the market. One woman I barely knew pressed her mouth into a line and said, "I heard," and there was something in her eyes that made me think she had a version of this story etched into the years behind her. People carry their own translations of pain. If you live long enough, you recognize the dialect. I didn't tell anyone why. I didn't need to. Truth circulates without my help when it's ready. I saw Nora once through her kitchen window, slicing lemons with a speed that looked like penance. She wore those hoops, not the pearl ones. Maybe she'd put those away. She looked up and saw me. We held each other's gaze for a breath that didn't feel like forgiveness or hatred, just recognition. Then the moment moved on without us. At work, I asked to move to a different branch. The manager nodded with that mix of regret and respect that makes you feel like a person worth moving mountains for. "You're good with people," she said. "We'll miss that." "I'll bring it with me," I said, surprising myself. I could pack that. I met with Janine again, and we went over the numbers like a map. She showed me the safe routes and the ones that cost more, but got you there faster. "What do you want to keep?" she asked. "My grandmother's dishes," I said. "The wooden table can go." My mouth smiled by itself. "No, The table has to go. She nodded. The retirement accounts? We'll split them, I said. Fairly. She looked at me in a way that felt like respect. You're making this easy. No, I said. I'm making it honest. We filed what we needed to file. He signed where he needed to sign. We found new words that felt strange in our mouths. Separation, mediation, equitable. None of them sounded like the life we'd built. But then again, neither did our life. In the evenings, when the house was showing, I drove to the lake a few miles out and sat on a bench that faced west. A group of older men fished at the far end, patient and quiet. A pair of teenagers practiced kissing in a way that would be funny to them later. I watched the light crawl across the water and thought about how many sunsets I had missed in the urgent years. Sometimes I cried. More often I didn't. I kept a book in the glove compartment and a blanket in the trunk. Preparation is a love language you can speak to yourself. One afternoon, I found a voicemail from Nora. No words at first, just breathing that sounded like someone trying to find a soft place to land inside a hard day. Claire, she said finally, I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I don't know if that matters. It probably doesn't, but I wanted you to hear it in my voice. I listened twice. I didn't call back. Some apologies are seeds you don't have to plant. Elaine called to say we had 3 offers. I stood in the driveway with the phone to my ear while a breeze lifted a single leaf and showed me its pale underside. We chose the young couple with a baby, so new the ink hadn't dried on her name. They came to the inspection wide-eyed and hopeful and asked if the backyard gets good shade in late afternoon. It does, I said. It's perfect for a small inflatable pool. I said it like a blessing. Mark and I coordinated schedules like colleagues. He moved tools to a storage unit and clothes to a rented apartment near the highway. I boxed up books and photo frames and the mugs that no longer knew our mouths. We stood in the garage one morning beside the bikes and the camping gear and sorted without touching. This goes here. That goes there. It was easier than I expected and harder than I'll say. When he left with the 3rd load, he put his hands in his pockets and looked at me like a man trying to memorize the view before the lights go out. I loved our life, he said. So did I answered. I'm sorry. I know. There is a mercy in not making people perform their shame for you. I told Maya and Ben the closing date, and they insisted on coming home that weekend to help. We slept on mattresses on the floor and ate pizza off paper plates, just like we did the week we moved in when the kids were small and thought sleeping on the floor meant we were wild. We laughed more than I expected. We cried at the appropriate moments, the ticks in the doorway where we measured their height, the dent in the baseboard from a scooter crash that didn't break a bone but turned a mother into a statue for a full minute. We took pictures in every room like tourists in our own life. On the last morning, we made coffee and sat on the porch steps and watched the street wake up. Mr. Callahan waved from his driveway with his trash bin. The postal carrier's dog tried to wedge its nose under our hands. The world went on in its ordinary way, which is sometimes the most radical kindness it can offer. Do you want to do it? Ben asked, holding the set of keys that had accompanied me into so many seasons. I nodded and stood. We walked to the kitchen sink, ran the water hot, and fed the keys through the keyring, one by one, with a care that felt ceremonial. The house felt it too. I swear it did. I placed the keys in a small bowl for the new owners with a note that said, "Welcome home." The left side of the sink drains slower when it rains. The oak in the back lets the light through just enough at 4 p.m. to make the walls look like a lake. The neighbor, 2 doors down, will bring you cookies on Tuesdays. Please be gentle with the floorboards. They know our footsteps. I signed it with just my first name. We loaded the last boxes into my car and their rental. I hugged the kids in the driveway. They smelled like shampoo and childhood and futures I won't get to shape. When they pulled away, I sat in the car and held the steering wheel and let my hands shake for a full minute. Then I drove. I had found an apartment across town, small, bright, with a window that looked out over a bakery that started at 4 a.m. The first morning I woke there, the smell of bread rose like hope you can eat. I bought a little round table with smooth edges and 2 chairs because 3 felt like wishful thinking. I hung a print above the sink that said, "Be where your feet are." It felt annoying and perfect. Freedom didn't arrive with trumpets. It came as a series of unremarkable mornings. I put my ring in a jewelry box and discovered my hands still knew how to move without its weight. I walked to the library and checked out books with the kind of hunger I hadn't felt in years. I signed up for a ceramics class at the community center because I wanted to make things that could hold something. The first bowl I threw was lopsided and beautiful in the way honest things are. I saw Nora again by accident at the farmer's market. She was with no one. She looked like a person practicing breathing. We stopped because we are civilized. Because our town is small. She asked how I was. I said, "Standing." She laughed once, a hard exhale that didn't catch on anything. She looked thinner, not in the way magazines praise, but in the way life takes from you when you aren't holding on properly. "Are you?" I started, and then decided it wasn't my business whether they were still a them. "No," she said, guessing the question. "It ended. She swallowed. "He doesn't know what he wants." I nodded. I didn't say, "He knew once." I didn't say, "I know what I want." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so familiar my hands remembered catching that same piece with a bobby pin before my wedding reception. I bought peaches. She bought flowers. We parted with the kind of politeness that aches. That night, I turned my phone face down and slept without waking. In the morning, I made coffee and sat at my little table and realized the quiet I had is different from the quiet I used to survive. This quiet contained me. It didn't erase me. Janine called to say the paperwork had cleared. The accounts were set. The house was officially someone else's. She told me she rarely sees people choose peace so insistently. "You did this well," she said. "I did this the only way I could live with," I said. At work, the new branch felt like a school where no one knows your old stories. I brought lemon squares on my 3rd day and learned the copier's mood on my 5th. A man came in with a hat that said veteran and told me about Italy in 1969, like it had happened yesterday. I listened. It felt like a job and a calling and a raft. The neighborhood didn't disappear. You can't untangle yourself from a place that taught you how to be a person. I drove through once, on purpose, 2 months later. The house looked different in small ways. The new owners had painted the door a cheerful blue. A tricycle sat on the lawn. The oak threw the same generous shade. I parked a block away and walked past like a stranger. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. It felt like visiting a school you graduated from. I won't pretend there weren't days I wanted to call and scream. There were. Some mornings I woke with my hands and fists and no memory of making them. But the body learns. The mind follows. I took those hands and put them to work, kneading bread, shaping clay, scrubbing a sink no one else would make dirty, writing down the dozens of small ways I was still here. The quiet revenge, if you want to call it that, took care of itself. People in town are polite, not blind. They saw the sign. They saw the move. They saw me not burn the world. They drew their own lines between points I didn't provide. I heard later that Nora lost a committee position she loved because the chairwoman said she needed a year to focus on her personal life. I didn't smile when I heard it. I didn't frown. I watered my plant. I went to class. I shaped another bowl. And then life did that thing where it offers you something small and good when you least expect it. I was leaving my ceramics class with clay under my nails and a cup badly pretending to be symmetrical when a man in the parking lot dropped a bag of potting soil and split it across the asphalt like a soft explosion. We bent at the same time to help and knocked heads. We laughed in the startled way strangers do when the world reminds you of your edges. "Sorry," he said. "Me too," I said. He looked like a person who had done the work of rebuilding and wasn't advertising it. He pointed to my clay-covered hand. You a potter or an optimist? Both, I said. Mostly the second. He smiled. He told me his name was Sam. He owned the plant nursery 2 blocks over, the one that had somehow stayed in business through 2 recessions, 3 mayors, and a pandemic. We stood in the soft mess of soil and talked about nothing important for 7 minutes and 12 seconds. I know because I checked my phone later and wrote it down like a teenager. Hope is embarrassing, and I recommend it. I didn't rush toward anything. That was the lesson. That and this. I could be exactly who I was without asking anyone's permission to exist. I made a second table at home by pushing my little one against the window. I put a bowl of fruit there and a notebook. Some mornings I wrote to my future self like she was a friend who moved away but still checked in. I told her when the light was good. I told her when I missed the dog we shared in the life before, and how I was afraid to get a new one because loving creatures means saying goodbye eventually. I told her that I bought new sheets, and they felt like a promise. Mark called me once in September. His voice was careful. I heard about the new branch, he said. Congratulations. Thank you, I said. How are you? He asked, and I could hear him bracing for impact. I'm steady, I said, and realized I meant it again. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he said, for the 1,000th time, but softer, like he was saying it to himself. I hope you're happy. I'm working on it, I said. You should too. We hung up with civility. It felt like putting a book back on a shelf after you finished it, knowing you won't read it again, but grateful it taught you something. The holidays came and I was afraid of them. They arrived anyway and turned out to be manageable. I hung a garland on the window and invited 2 coworkers who didn't have anywhere to go. We ate too much and watched a movie none of us paid attention to. We went for a walk and looked at lights and didn't mention the ache humming behind each of our ribs. I slept well that night for reasons I don't need to examine closely. Sometimes people ask me now, in careful voices, if I forgive them, him, her. I don't know. Forgiveness isn't a yes or no for me. It's a season, and some days the weather cooperates. Other days it rains, and I don't go out without a coat. What I know is this: I don't carry them in my mouth anymore. When I say their names, they don't cut me on the way out. The closest thing to revenge I ever served was showing up to my own life, buying flowers for a table that only had my elbows on it, saying no without explanation, saying yes to things I would have apologized for wanting, letting the town see me standing, letting my children see me as someone who didn't vanish when the story bent. Months later, I ran into the new homeowners when I stopped by the bakery across from my apartment. The baby had become a toddler with opinions. The mother told me the afternoon light really did turn the walls to water and that she thought of me when she saw it. She said they'd found my note about the sink and wrote their own for the next people someday. The world keeps going forward, even when you think it can't. On my way home, I walked past Sam's nursery. I stood at the edge and watched him talk to a woman about geraniums. He moved his hands when he spoke, gentle, like he was showing how fragile stems can be without scaring anyone into not touching them. He glanced up, saw me, and lifted one hand in a wave that somehow felt like a bridge. I walked in. Still optimistic? He said. Still, I said. He picked up a plant with tiny white flowers like little stars that refused to brag. This one's called Sweet Alyssum, he said. Spreads quietly. Smells like honey if you lean in close. I like quiet things, I said, and this time my voice felt like it belonged to someone who chose her life instead of someone who survived it. I took the plant home and set it on my windowsill. The bakery fired up at 4 a.m. again. The sky did that special thing with color my kids know to photograph. I texted them first for once. The apartment held me like a cup I'd made myself. Crooked, yes. Mine, completely. And that's the part no one tells you about starting over after a betrayal that involved your best friend and your husband. The justice you get might not look like headlines. It might look like a window plant that forgives you if you forget to water it once. It might look like the shape of your own hands, learning new work. It might look like a woman sitting at a small table, eating toast she made in a kitchen no one else has a claim to, breathing air she can't believe is this easy at last. The days started to fill themselves. I'd wake to the smell of bread from the bakery downstairs, the clatter of trays and voices that had already been up for hours. For a while, I stayed in the habit of measuring mornings by what I'd lost. Then one day, I caught myself counting what I had instead: light, space, air that didn't belong to anyone else's moods. Sam's nursery sat 2 blocks away, tucked behind a diner that smelled like fried onions no matter the hour. I started visiting on Saturdays under the pretense of learning how not to kill plants. He always seemed to be there, hands in soil, talking to each customer as if they were an old neighbor who'd just come home. The first time he handed me a tray of herbs, I remember thinking his hands looked like work, not talk. He didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He told me which plants forgave neglect, which ones needed company, which ones didn't mind shade. I wrote it all down like it mattered. One morning, I brought him coffee as thanks, one for him, one for me. He smiled like it was the first rule of a new friendship. We drank it standing among rows of green things that didn't care who'd betrayed whom. Everything here keeps growing even after it gets cut back, he said. That's kind of the point. He didn't say it as advice, but I took it that way anyway. By late fall, I had plants in every corner of my apartment. The windowsill was a jungle. The air smelled faintly of mint and wet soil. I'd send pictures to Maya and Ben. Their responses came with too many heart emojis and the kind of warmth adult children send when they finally stop worrying about their parent. "Look at you," Ben texted. "You're turning into a plant lady." "Not a bad kind of lady to be," I replied. Sam started closing the nursery earlier as the days got shorter, and sometimes we'd walk the 2 blocks together toward our cars. He'd talk about his daughter, grown now, living in Oregon, sending him postcards of mountains and rain. I told him about my kids, about the table I'd sold, about how the smallest apartment in town could still feel like a cathedral when you open the windows at dusk. He listened the way good people do, not waiting to talk, just listening. One evening he asked, "Do you ever miss it, the old house?" I thought about that for a moment. I miss the sound of my kids running down the hall. But the rest? I don't think I miss the house as much as I miss who I thought I was in it. He nodded. "That's honest." "Honesty is the only thing I can still afford in bulk," I said, and we both laughed softly. Winter came like forgiveness. Slow, reluctant, but it came. The bakery started putting out cinnamon rolls again, and the city hung lights over the street that looked like stars caught in wires. Sam gave me a small fir tree in a pot. "Don't plant it yet," he said. "Keep it inside through the cold. Let it adjust." I kept it in the corner by the window, a tiny green thing against a gray sky. Every morning, I watered it sparingly, the way you do when you've learned that too much care can drown something fragile. On Christmas Eve, Maya and Ben came over with groceries and noise. We cooked in my small kitchen, bumping elbows, stealing bites, laughing about how the oven ran hot. At one point, Maya looked around and said, "Mom, you look happy." And I realized I was, not giddy, not pretending, just quietly full. After they left, I walked to the window. Across the street, the bakery's lights glowed against the snow. The fir tree's needles shimmered faintly in the reflection of everything I'd survived. In January, Sam invited me to help at the nursery on weekends. Just to keep me from talking to the plants too much, he'd said. It started small, repotting, watering, labeling trays. But there was something meditative about it. The rhythm of soil and breath, the simplicity of tending to things that wanted nothing but light and patience. He'd make tea at noon, and we'd sit on overturned buckets in the sunroom talking about small things, music, recipes, the stubborn way hope keeps showing up. He never asked about Mark. I never asked about the woman who broke him years ago. We understood without needing to fill in the blanks. Spring came in slow increments, one morning at a time. The trees on Main Street bloomed white, and the air started to carry that wet green scent of beginnings. I found myself humming while watering plants, catching my reflection in the shop window and almost not recognizing her. Hair loose, face softer. One afternoon, as we were closing up, Sam handed me a small terracotta pot with a single sprout breaking through the soil. "What's this?" I asked. "Something that doesn't grow unless you take it home," he said. He looked at me then. Not the way men look at women when they're looking for something, but the way you look at someone who's been standing in the same place as you for a while without realizing it. "Dinner?" he asked, quiet, not urgent. I smiled. "Maybe, after I see if this thing survives a week with me." He laughed, and that was enough. I took the plant home, set it beside the fir, now taller, stronger, ready to be planted outside come summer. I didn't rush to name what was growing between us. Not love, not yet. Something simpler, kinder, something that didn't ask me to erase what came before. In the evenings, I'd light a candle, open the window, and listen to the city breathe. I'd think about how I once believed revenge meant payback. Now I knew better. Revenge was peace. It was joy without permission. It was surviving beautifully, out loud, in a world that thought you'd stay broken. And sometimes, when the smell of soil filled the room and the moonlight hit just right, I'd whisper to myself, "This is what forgiveness looks like. Not for them, for me." If you're hearing this, I suppose enough time has passed that it doesn't sting anymore. Or maybe sting isn't the right word. Maybe it's just that the ache has settled into something manageable, like weather you've learned to live with. It's been 5 years since I packed the last box and handed over the keys. The house, my old house, belongs to other people now. Sometimes when I drive that way, I slow down at the corner and let myself look without stopping. There's a different car in the driveway, toys on the lawn, curtains I wouldn't have chosen. It's strange. The shape of it is the same, but it doesn't know my name anymore, and that's exactly how it should be. I still live above the bakery. The smell of yeast and sugar still wakes me before the alarm. My apartment's smaller than the walk-in closet we once had, but it fits me. Everything here earns its place. 1 table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books, a forest of plants that have somehow all survived. The little fir tree I kept that first winter grew tall enough to move to Sam's nursery last year. It stands in the back row, a steady green reminder that even things you think won't last sometimes do. Sam is still here too. We never rushed. We still don't. Some evenings he brings leftovers from the diner next door, and we eat at the window, watching the city lean into twilight. We talk about nothing most of the time, and somehow in that nothing, I found more peace than I ever did in the noise of my old life. That's the thing no one tells you. Silence, when it's yours, is the loudest kind of joy. My children are grown. Maya teaches now. Ben builds houses. They come home when they can. They still take pictures of the sky for me, still text me about the shape of clouds. And when they hug me goodbye, they don't look worried anymore. They know their mother is steady again, not the kind of steady that holds everything together for everyone else, but the kind that stands on her own 2 feet and doesn't apologize for the space she takes up. People sometimes ask, carefully, if I ever forgave Mark. I tell them forgiveness isn't something you hand over like a returned item. It's something you grow into when you stop needing revenge to feel alive. He lives somewhere upstate now, I think. We speak at holidays, brief, polite, like weather reports. And that's enough. I don't wish him harm. I just don't wish him anything. Indifference, I've learned, is the final stage of freedom. As for Nora, I saw her once about a year ago. It was at the grocery store. We were both standing in front of the same display of peaches because life has a sense of humor. We made small talk, prices, weather, nothing that could bleed. Her hair had gone gray at the edges. Mine had too. For a moment, I thought about all the years between us, the laughter, the lies, the way friendship can turn into a language only ghosts still understand. And then I just smiled, wished her well, and walked away. No bitterness, no satisfaction, just peace. That, I think, was the real revenge. Living long enough that the wound no longer defined the skin around it. When I look back now, I don't see tragedy. I see transformation. Losing them wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I finally stepped into it. Everything after that, the quiet mornings, the small kindnesses, the second chances I never planned on, has been the reward. If you ever find yourself where I was, blindsided, broken, convinced your story's over, remember this: it isn't. It's just changing authors. And sometimes the person who betrayed you leaves behind the one thing you needed most, a blank page. Mine started with coffee, a plant, and a window. Yours can start wherever you are. Just start, and keep going until the silence you once feared starts to sound like peace, because that's what quiet looks like.